Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to the Community IT Innovators webinar. We're so happy that you're hosting us today, Nonprofit Learning Lab, and we're going to be talking about creating value by designing an IT roadmap for your nonprofit. So I know planning for IT is one of those things that nonprofits have to do, and it can be a little scary. It might make you feel like you have to do it, but it's overwhelming. So today we're going to take you through some steps of how to think about it, and then some practical steps on how to put that roadmap together, and then create actual timeline and steps that you can take to improve your IT. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'll be the moderator today. Before I came to Community IT, I was, believe it or not, the IT Director at a couple different nonprofits, large and small. So I know what you're going through, and I've been there. I know it's hard to figure out even how to put a roadmap together if you're not an IT person, which I definitely was not. So I'm very happy to be here today with Johan, who's going to help us think through it. So Johan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. And my thanks to the Nonprofit Learning Lab for hosting this webinar today. We're really excited to be presenting on this topic. I'm the CEO at Community IT. I've been with the company for over 20 years. Actually started on the technical side and worked directly with a lot of nonprofit organizations in helping them to use technology more effectively. I moved into management about 15 years ago and became the CEO of Community IT in 2015 when our founder, David Deal, left and sold the company to the employees.
So before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit about us. We're a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. So we provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish your missions through the effective use of technology. We are big fans of what well-managed IT can do for your nonprofit. We serve nonprofits across the United States, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. We are technology experts, and we are consistently given the MSP 501 rating for being a top MSP, which is a recognition we received again in 2022. So I do want to remind everyone that for the purpose of these presentations, we are vendor agnostic. So we only make recommendations to our clients once we have their IT roadmap in place of what they need to do and the licenses they need to have and all of that. We do consider ourselves a best of breed IT provider. So it's our job to know the landscape, what tools are available, reputable, and widely used. And we make recommendations on that basis for our clients, based on their business needs, their priorities, and their budgets. So I invite you to join us for our monthly webinar series where we cover other IT topics for nonprofits. You can check out our podcast. We have a YouTube channel as well with lots of free resources. So we really believe, and we are so lucky to be working with Nonprofit Learning Lab on this too, to provide a lot of resources free to our community so that everyone can do IT better. All right, and with that, I want to go through our learning objectives for today. So how to set priorities, how to start designing an IT roadmap from your priorities, how to allocate budget, time, and your staff energy. That's something we'll talk about. How to understand change management and the capacity of your nonprofit. And then we will get to project timelines and planning steps. So we have a lot that we're going to cover today. We're going to try to leave as much time as we can for some Q&A. And first, we are going to start out with a couple of different polls. So poll number one, what is your role in your organization? And you could have the options to be a team member, a manager, a director, executive level, CEO or C-level, or this is not applicable. So it looks like we have about 3/4 of the people have voted. So Johan, can you see that? And if you can, would you read the results?
Yeah, I can see it. 40% of the respondents are team members, 20% are managers, another 20% directors, and another 20% at the executive level. So pretty even distribution across those 4 different categories.
Excellent. All right. And we're going to skip right ahead to our next poll. So at your organization, who does IT report to? And this really can be so different in different organizations. So your options are IT reports to the CIO, a Chief Information Officer, or the CTO, a Chief Technology Officer. So someone at the C level. Number 2, IT reports to an IT director, who then reports to someone else. Number 3, IT reports directly to the CFO, the COO, or the executive director. So your chief financial officer, your chief operations officer, or your executive director. Number 4, which is also very common, there's only me in my organization and I do it all. And number 5, other or not applicable. So you do have IT, but it doesn't report to one of these different categories. The first 2 are really kind of in the IT area. So a C-level person that is responsible for IT, or an IT director who then maybe reports to the executive director or to the CFO, or IT sometimes reports directly to the finance operations or executive director, or maybe there's only you and you are the one doing it all. All right, so I think that we have pretty good response on this one as well. Johan, do you want to read the results?
Yep. 5% of respondents have IT reporting to the IT director. A quarter, 20%, 27% have IT reporting to the CFO, COO, or executive director. Another quarter, 23%, it's only you and you do it all for IT, and then about half, 45%, are other.
All right, that's great, very interesting. So everyone who's out there doing it all yourself, we see you and we appreciate you. All right, so we have one more while we're all feeling interactive. So the third poll is, how do you manage IT now? So your first option could be, we have a well-defined process annually. Second option is we have an ad hoc process. Third option, it's every department for themselves. So there may be a process, but it's by the different departments do their own thing. They may or may not have a process internally, but there's no organization-wide process. Number 4, we don't have an IT strategy. If that's you, you've come to the right place. There's no judgment and no worries. We're here to help you. And then number 5 option is other or not applicable. So you can see there's a range, and I just want to emphasize again, like, there is no shame in falling in any of these categories. It's nonprofits span from very large to very small, have all different levels of tech savviness. So just being in this webinar means that you want to have a IT roadmap. So go ahead and get your answers in. Okay, I think we have pretty good response there. And Johan, would you like to read it?
5% have a well-defined process annually. About 50% have an ad hoc process, 40% don't have an IT strategy, and then 10% are in the other category.
Excellent. Okay, so that was really very informative, and I hope that if you are in this webinar that maybe you feel like there are other people who are in your same boat. So that's a good thing about doing that, those polls and kind of showing people where they are in the process. So our next learning objective that we're going to start out with is setting priorities. And Johan, I'm going to turn this over to you. We often say that people need to start with an assessment at their nonprofit. So can you talk a little bit about how you do that and how people might go about it?
Yeah, I think so. In some ways, what a roadmap is a statement of priorities. What do you need to do, and when are you going to do them? What comes first, and then what comes next. So that at its simplest level, that's basically what an IT roadmap is. And it's helpful to have that written down so that it can be communicated to other groups in the organization, particularly leadership. With any luck, you have a board that's engaged in a healthy way with the organization and might be interested in knowing what the IT roadmap is. But fundamentally, an IT roadmap is a statement of organizational priorities. What's the most important thing that the organization needs to work on? So in order to make those decisions and identify what needs to be focused on first, what are the highest priority items that the organization has, you have to know where you are. You have to have an understanding of where things stand with IT in the organization. And that's why an assessment is so important. And we typically recommend an assessment as the first step in developing an IT roadmap. And that sounds fancy like that. I think sometimes people get intimidated by, IT assessment, I'm going to have to go hire an expensive consultant to come in, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and I'm going to have a long document. And that may be true for larger organizations that are more complex in terms of their structure and the work that they're doing. But for smaller organizations, an assessment could just be a very simple, just a 1-page, 2-page Word document where you try to document as best you can the IT that the organization has. So, that's a snapshot is a great place to start. Now, for more mature and more sophisticated organizations, that extensive report may be necessary. So it really depends on your organization, the size of the organization, your operational maturity, and you'll have a best sense, what is going to be appropriate for you all. You can also, and whoever has responsibility for IT for your organization, like whoever's solving the IT problems as they come up, and maybe your IT department, you may have outsourced IT to somebody. You may have an accidental techie in the organization. You may be the accidental techie. Anyone who's responsible for IT is basically should be the first place you go to develop the assessment. They should have the expertise and the understanding of IT in the organization to basically, put together a list, like an inventory. Here's what here are all the IT systems that we have that the organization uses. That can be hardware, it can be software, it can be cloud applications. Just make it as exhaustive a list as you can. And then for each system, identify, is it meeting our needs? Is it not meeting our needs? Is there a risk involved in this system, or is it relatively stable? Are there gaps? Are there things that the organization is trying to do that it can't do because it doesn't have the IT system in place? So that's essentially, at a very basic level, what the assessment is. And it's something that's going to be unique to your organization, and as I mentioned earlier. And once you get that list, that assessment of that inventory of IT systems with an evaluation of where the systems are and how well they're meeting the needs of the organization, then you can start to prioritize that list, and that kind of leads you into developing the roadmap.
I love saying that it can be a Word document, because I think a lot of people think, oh, there's a template or there's a specific way that I have to document this. And really, you can just sit around yourself or with some people in your department or in your organization, and you can do it on a whiteboard, you can do it with Post-its, you can do it in a Word document. Just take a note of all of the kind of IT questions that are out there and what you know that you have. Johan, if you want to talk a little bit more about setting priorities once you have that list.
Yeah, once you have the list, and this isn't like a universal recommendation. There are situations where it doesn't necessarily go in the order that we've listed it here. But in general, in our experience, our recommendation is that the top priorities are with the hardware infrastructure. And for organizations that still have an office that they're going to, that might include the networking, the connection to the internet, wireless networks that provide access for staff in the office. It could include conference room equipment, particularly if your organization is working in a hybrid capacity and needs to be able to have meetings where there are people, joining remotely and also people in the office joining the meeting. It certainly includes computers. And this is one of our big recommendations for organizations, that organizations provide the computing devices for their staff to use. There are probably exceptional cases where that isn't necessary. We have not really run into those ourselves, but I can imagine sort of, theoretically, circumstances where BYOD, bring your own device, is an appropriate approach to providing staff with their computing equipment. But in our experience with small and medium-sized nonprofits, that almost never works out, and the organization is much better off providing laptops generally to their staff, for their staff to work on. And so if you go through that assessment list and you see that all of your laptops, you're either not providing laptops for your staff, you're maybe providing laptops for some staff but not all staff, or the laptops that are being provided are old, they're 5 or 6 years old, that would be something to prioritize, because if the hardware isn't working, nothing else is going to work. And we've seen over and over again situations where organizations are just kind of stuck in the mud with their IT because they haven't prioritized investing in hardware. Once you make those investments, then it really kind of takes you to the next level. And once you've got a good lifecycle workstation, lifecycle replacement plan in place, and we recommend replacing laptops every 3 to 4 years, desktops every 4 to 5 years. So you're basically replacing all of your computer equipment. You're replacing a third to a quarter to 20% of your computer equipment every year. That's our recommended approach, and it becomes part of your ongoing operating budget. Once you've got that system in place and it just kind of is running in maintenance mode almost, and once you've done that for your networking equipment as well, then you can start to focus on your existing services. So the services that you're using for email, also the services that you're using for security. What are you using to protect the data of the organization? Services that you're using for managing projects and initiatives, services that you're using for managing donations and funding, or for program delivery, or for financial management. So basically all of the different organizational functions that your nonprofit has most likely have some IT service corresponding to that organizational function, whether it's something advanced like Razor's Edge for fundraising management, or something simple like a spreadsheet. A lot of organizations will start with using a spreadsheet, which I'm personally a big fan of. I think that can be a great way to start tracking data and information, particularly in an early stage of using an information system, especially for smaller programs. But you need to prioritize making sure that those existing services are paid for, are being well supported, are secure, and are being well managed. And it's possible for a service to be deployed and then not really be managed very well. So you want to identify those services in that assessment and identify those services that may need additional attention. And then once you've prioritized that, you can focus on new initiatives. Are there new programs that that your organization is pursuing that are going to require new IT systems? Or is there new ways of collaborating? So, a cliche example would be the shift to remote work that happened in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. In a sense, that was a new initiative because it was, for a lot of organizations, it was a whole new way of working. And there was a new IT system that went along with that shift, which was Zoom for a lot of organizations, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet for other organizations. So there was a new way of working, and it had an IT system that needed to be, purchased and deployed and supported and invested in that went along with it. So, and that's a good reminder that, the best laid plans, right? You can put your roadmap together, but the unexpected will come up. The nice thing about having a roadmap is that when the unexpected does arise, you can see how it fits into the overall capacity of your organization to manage IT.
That's a great thing to think about, because I know we had at least one client in 2020 that already had their roadmap in place for going to remote service over the next 4 years. So when they had to approach their funder, I remember they were able to take that to them and do it in like 4 months or something like that. They were compacted what they had been planning to spend on their new equipment and their ability to do this remote service. So it really was helpful to them that they already had the roadmap in place and were able to just take that to their funder and talk about what they already had planned to do. So that's another good thing about having the roadmap in place. But we've been talking kind of abstract about this. So designing an IT roadmap from your priorities. If you are a visual learner, so here we have an example of what, once you've put those priorities in place and thought about those levels that Johan was just talking about, this is an example of what it might look like. So Johan, if you want to talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so the connection here is, you inventory your systems, all of your IT systems, hardware, software, services. You do an assessment of those systems, and then based on that assessment, you develop a list of recommendations. And these are essentially improvements that need to be made. So for example, the first item here, laptop encryption, it's a critical security need that every organization should implement. So maybe you did the assessment, you were looking at your laptops, and as part of that assessment, identified that the laptops aren't encrypted and your staff work from home. So if the laptop gets stolen or lost or misplaced, organizational data may be on the laptop in an unencrypted form. And particularly if you're working with PII, that becomes a disclosure incident, and you have to disclose that the PII that your organization works with was stolen. If the laptops of your staff are encrypted, then the disclosure requirement is no longer
Can you
there.
just remind us what PII is?
Oh, yes, thanks, Carolyn. Personally identifiable information. So, so if you're managing donations and you have your donor's name and address, that's PII. Probably the most high-profile example of PII is HIPAA, the health data that exists in electronic medical records. So that's just one example that, in this sample that we've got here, we've listed a variety of different recommendations that were made by whoever put the assessment together, developing, and it's a mix, right? Like some of these are technical tasks that need to be completed. Some of them are improvements to existing services. Some of them are adjacent to IT, to the technology, but essential to using the IT effectively, like developing an IT acceptable use policy, or developing an incident response plan. So once you've come up with that list of recommendations, then the next step is to prioritize. And we like to categorize recommendations in these 3 different categories of urgency, complexity, and impact. And so urgency is, how important is this? How how critical is it? What's the level of risk associated with this recommendation? So for example, laptop encryption, high risk, it's pretty urgent, it needs to happen quickly. Server decommissioning, if you have critical information on an old server that's out of warranty, that's at risk of failure, that's pretty high risk as well. The managed printer solution, that's maybe not as urgent. That could even be low urgency if no one's really coming into the office. I know the printing is one of those things that can be a lot of work to troubleshoot and fix. And if you don't have a lot of people coming into the office, it may not be worth it. So looking at the urgency is important, and then looking at the complexity, because this really refers to the level of effort that's going to be required to do the work. Because in some cases you may have, this is just an illustration. So, maybe developing an IT acceptable use policy is highly complex for your organization. If you're a small organization and you already have an employee handbook, you could get a template for the acceptable use policy, put that in place, and you're good to go. So that may be an item of low complexity for your organization. So looking at the complexity is important. And then finally, the impact. And this means impact in the sense, in like a change management sense. What will be the impact on staff? So for example, with laptop encryption, that's something that might require you to touch every laptop. You might need to have everybody bring their laptop into the office, and you're running encryption, the encryption on the laptop, and it could take a day. So that could be a high, depending on where your staff are located, that could have a high impact. It could be something that's difficult to do. Whereas implementing Office 365 managed backup, that runs behind the scenes. It's not really something that anyone's going to notice, so that has low impact. So it's important to look at these three different categories: urgency, complexity, and impact, because they give you a sense of how quickly do we need to do this, how much effort is going to be required to do this, and what's the impact on the organization of implementing this recommendation. Because complexity or the effort required ultimately comes down to either an in-house person's time or an outsourced provider's costs. So there's budgetary, and resource allocation considerations that need to be taken into account when you're looking at complexity. And you can't do everything at once. So you want to manage or plan out your roadmap so that you're doing maybe you're pairing like this quarter you're going to do one complex initiative and one less complicated initiative. And by the same token, you also don't want to plan initiatives that have high impact at times when the organization is really busy. You don't want to do a major migration right before your organization's fundraiser or conference or board meetings. So just making sure that you're looking at, when staff have time to absorb the change that comes from pursuing IT initiatives is going to be important as well.
I think that's something that we're going to touch on a little bit more in the second half, but I wanted to give everyone a kind of a quick quiz here, and that's a perfect segue, Johan, into talking about your IT strategy and your roadmap creation. So do you need an IT roadmap? I hope that people on the webinar will agree that yes, you do. Can you make one yourself, or do you need IT consultants? I think it's kind of mixed. I love the idea that you can just use a spreadsheet. And so depending on the size of your organization, how many staff you have, how complex your IT is, you may be able to just put that together yourself. But if you do have IT consultants or feel that you need someone with more experience who knows, the landscape and all the different systems that you're using, you could still ask for this in a spreadsheet. In whatever format you're going to get this in, it needs to be something that you can understand and follow. And then we're going to use it later in this presentation to talk about how you create your steps of how you tackle this roadmap. And then what skill set and background does someone need to take on an IT planning role? I hope that the people in this webinar are getting a sense that you need to learn enough about IT so that you can manage it, but you don't need to be an IT person in order to take on an IT planning role. In fact, it's something that leadership at every nonprofit needs to feel responsible for. Your IT is your office. We can't operate without IT. So kind of that idea of putting it like, oh, that's the IT person's job to do that. It's like, well, it's strategic and it's planning and it's budgeting. So it really falls on leadership.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.